Okay, good evening and welcome to the December 9th, 2024 meeting of the Town of Barnstable Planning Board. Located here at Barnstable Town Hall, 367 Main Street, Hyannis, Mass. In the James H. Crocker Jr. Hearing Room. We're located on the second floor here and it is 7 p.m. The meeting notice has been previously filed with the town clerk in accordance with Mass General Law. All application materials may be accessed through the Planning Board website or by contacting Karen Pina at karen.pina@town.barnstable.ma.us or calling 508-862-4064. Notice of recording, the meeting will be televised live via Xfinity Channel 8 or High Definition Channel 1072. It may also be accessed via the government access live stream on the Town of Barnstable's website, which is streaming85.townofbarnstable.us/cablecast public site. I will now inquire whether anyone else is recording, and if so, please make your presence known. Seeing none, I will call the meeting to order this evening and introduce our board members and our staff, starting with Michael. Matt.
Michael Messinas, good evening.
Matt Tague.
Ray.
Ray Sexton, good evening.
Bob.
Bob Twist, good evening.
Tim.
Good evening, Tim O'Neill.
And staff, Jim.
Good evening, Jim Cupford, Director of Planning.
And Karen.
Good evening, Karen Pina, Admin Assistant, Planning and Development.
And my name is Steve Robichaud. Welcome. We will start with general public comment this evening. This is for public comment not related to any of our agenda items this evening. If anybody would wish to speak, please come forward at this time. Seeing none, we will continue to our first item this evening, which is an approval not required plan. And let's see, Tim, you mind reading this one?
No problem. This is Park City Wind LLC has submitted an approval not required plan entitled Approval Not Required Plan of Land Prepared for Park City Wind LLC, Barnstable, Massachusetts, dated November 26, 2024.
Thank you very much. And as an A&R, this is not a public hearing. The board is in receipt of correspondence dated December 8th, 2024 from Stacy Gunther. And simply because of the content of that correspondence, Jim, I wanted to turn to you, if you don't mind, if you can give us just a quick scope of, an A&R. An A&R is a limited item. It's very limited in what this board is looking at and what our role is. So if you don't mind just outlining that for the record.
Absolutely, not a problem. So yes, as the chair mentioned, it is a fairly limited review. This is guided under Mass General Law 41, Section 81P, entitled Approval of Plans Not Subject to the Control Law. The control law references the subdivision control law. So an approval not required plan seems kind of silly because the title is Approval Not Required, and yet here we are for endorsement of a plan. But it is spelled out specifically in Mass General Law under that section that I just referenced, that if it has adequate access as well as frontage, then an endorsement may be entitled with some other stipulations as defined in our ordinance. The application before you, as referenced in the staff report, has been reviewed for compliance with those standards, and they have been met. And so the board is simply looking at whether or not there is frontage and there is adequate access to that lot. The submission is required to be reviewed and endorsed, if so, within 21 days. And if the board does not endorse that plan, it is constructively approved by the town clerk's office and can be recorded at the Registry of Deeds.
Yeah, just to emphasize that, again, the board must take action. If the board does not take action, it is just kind of approved by default. Ray, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to be clear, this is a strictly technical issue, basically reviewing whether or not this meets the standards that have been laid out as in Massachusetts general law, and this is not the appropriate forum to comment on any larger issues that may be associated with this. This is strictly, do they meet the standards? And if so, then we are deciding whether approval is required or not.
Exactly right. You're looking at the lot lines that are being created or altered in compliance with Mass General Law. It is not to review zoning. We actually require a statement in there that says we're not reviewing for zoning compliance on the plan. And it doesn't, it's not in review of any specific project or use.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely, thank you, Ray. And again, as mentioned, the board is in receipt of a staff report dated December 9th, 2024. And I'll now turn to the applicant. If we have the applicant here this evening, if there's any comments to be made, anything to add? Certainly don't have to. It's very straightforward. All set?
We're here for any questions.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate that. So we'll go through the board quickly to see if there's any questions, comments, concerns, starting with Michael,
I'm all set, thank you.
Matt,
None, thank you.
Ray,
None here, Mr. Chairman.
Bob,
I'm good, thanks.
Tim?
I'm all set, thank you.
And I am also all set. Just a reminder, motion on this will need to include the findings, which are found on page 2 of the staff report. Do we have a motion on this?
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to endorse the plan entitled Approval Not Required Plan of Plan Prepared for Park City Wind LLC, prepared for Park City Wind LLC, prepared by Dawood, last revised November 26, 2024, as an approval not required plan with the following findings. One, it does not constitute a subdivision because each of the lots have the minimum required frontage on an existing way, having suitable grades and adequate construction to provide for the needs of vehicular traffic in relation to the proposed use and for the installation of municipal services to serve such use, or has been labeled as not buildable. And number two, all materials and conditions of Chapter 801, Article 4, approval not required plans have been submitted and are in full compliance.
Thank you, Tim. And do we have a second?
I'll
Second.
second.
Give it to Matt. Thank you, Matt. All those in favor? Michael?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Ray?
Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
Tim?
Aye.
And myself, Steve Robichaud, votes aye. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next agenda item, which is general correspondence. We don't have any general correspondence this evening. Jim, do you have a staff update for us? Yes, I'm going to sign real quick, but you can go ahead and start, Jim.
Absolutely. So I do have a few updates for the staff report. On December 19th, the local comprehensive planning committee will meet again to hopefully finalize the future land use map. The future land use map has been open for public comment for about 2 months now. It's got a lot of good feedback online and through emails and written comment, and those are all posted on the barnstablelcp.com website. And so again, December 19th, right here in this room, at 5:30 will be that meeting. The hope is for the local comprehensive planning committee to put together the final draft or the draft of the local comprehensive plan for public review starting in the new year, probably closer to February, and then crisscross the community again with that draft to see if we've heard our community correct. Aside from the LCP, we are soon to go out with a request for proposals for a consultant to assist us in the open space and recreation plan update. This plan is soon to expire towards the end of this 2025, and we'd like to update that so that we're still eligible for certain state grants. This is a state requirement to certify an open space plan, kind of similar to a housing production plan where there's very specific state requirements. So we're seeking to update that here in early 2025. And lastly, the Marston's Mills School redevelopment planning initiative is ongoing. It will be before the town council on January 9th. For a presentation, very similar to what, if you've reviewed past presentations of the 3 concepts, will be an opportunity for now the town council to get their real first opportunity to weigh in on those 3 concepts, and they'll be given all the public comment that's received to date. So that's just the next step, the next iteration of the process, with hope of getting some early feedback on those concepts and guide the next steps as we move forward. That's what I got.
Thank you very much, Jim. And in regards to the open space plan, certainly I'm excited about that. Kyle actually presented on behalf of the planning department to the CPC to fund a consultant, RFP for a consultant for the open space plan, which we approved unanimously. So certainly there's support for that, and we're excited to see that get going. Go ahead.
Sorry, I got one more thing. We've been busy. We also have, if you haven't reviewed the link that I believe we've sent out, housing report snapshot. So that is, we recorded about 30-minute long presentation on the housing production that has taken place over essentially since 2017. That's really when the first initiative started, and you'll see in that presentation it's really ramped up in the past year or so, and it goes project by project of every housing project that has been is in the permitting process, has been permitted, is under construction, and has been constructed since 2017. So please take a look and feel free to reach out with any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to offer my gratitude to Jim and his team for all their effort. The presentation shows some serious progress and accomplishments, and it's also a great presentation, so great job putting that together. Jim, one more thing. Do you mind just mentioning what is the next step in regards to the housing production plan? We reviewed it. Our letter is ready. It's signed. And what happens now?
Yep. So as you guys know, you've reviewed the housing production plan over the course of 4 meetings, I believe, and offered your recommendation to the town council. That letter is now signed and will be headed off to the town council for their consideration. And we'll be seeking guidance from town council as to what next steps are, and I'll certainly report back to the board.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Ray?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say, Jim, kudos to you. As you know, this is a really important issue to me, and I'm really pleased that it's not, after so many years in Washington, we need a dashboard, but it's not red, green, and yellow, but it's good enough. It's terrific, and well done. Thank you.
Yeah, I second that. Thank you for that, Ray. Any questions, comments from the rest of the board? All set? Okay, excellent. Moving on, we have...
I just want to thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Next up is a discussion presentation from the Cape Cod Commission. We have with us this evening Steve Tupper, Deputy Director of the Cape Cod Commission. Welcome, Steve. Thank you so much for coming. And this evening, Steve is presenting on the Cape Cod Vision Zero Action Plan. And we're excited you're here. Thank you again. And take it away.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Happy to be here tonight, sharing an update on our Vision Zero work. Hope to be able to provide an update on some of the work we've done so far. Hopefully you'll come away with a couple new facts and figures that help some of the conversations around this. And then at the end, I want to invite some member discussions. So I want to hear any feedback from board members, and then those who aren't able to be here tonight, there's also online opportunities to provide comment on this process. So first, a little bit about myself to give you a background. I've been with the commission for just over 13 years now. I'm a civil engineer, transportation engineer by training, so I do a variety of work in that space, but also on a number of other projects. So did want to give out a quick shout out to another project we're doing with Jim and his team on a digital equity plan for the town. So if you are interested in internet connectivity, affordability, devices, and digital literacy skills, happy to have that conversation. But today, really wanted to focus on the Vision Zero effort. I'm going to provide a little bit of overview. So I'll give you an overview of the project first, give you some of that data that we've dug into first to help frame some of the conversations, share some countermeasures that we're going to be looking at in the next phase of the process, highlight some of the public engagement, and highlight again the ways that this board and others can interact with the process. So I want to start with really framing the conversation about why it's important to be digging into safety right now. It's because there's really quite a shift in the profession. And that's why I wanted to highlight my background as an engineer, because I think we're at a point where there's some questions about the engineering profession overall and really the traditional way of designing roadways. And this way of thinking, really shifting to a safe streets approach, is one that's being embraced by many engineers and certainly planners. And I know you've had some detailed discussions with some individuals on the cutting edge of that and on the Hyannis Main Street project. So certainly following that closely. But really wanted to highlight this as an opportunity to think about all aspects of roadway safety and all things that it's going to take to eliminate roadway fatalities and serious injuries. So it takes a shift in thinking from thinking about the fact that traffic deaths are inevitable to realizing that with proper efforts, they are preventable. Realizing that people are imperfect, and it shouldn't be the case that if somebody makes an error while they're a pedestrian, the result is a fatality. So we have to design a system that allows for mistakes and doesn't result in a fatality in those situations. And then finally, things about all elements of the system. So on the right there, you'll see all of the things that interact in terms of a roadway fatality or serious injury. So it's not just about roadway design. As a civil engineer, we can do part of the puzzle, but it really takes looking at the entire spectrum, the vehicle, the driver, the system of care after a collision. There's a number of areas that go in, and certainly you see safer speeds on there. You'll see that as a theme throughout, as it's really from the data coming out as a significant issue. So the first thing we did in embarking on this is realizing that we can't solve it from an engineering lens. So we brought together a Vision Zero Advisory Committee that represented a number of different interests across our community. Great representation from across the Cape, some really standout representation from the town of Barnstable as well. We wanted to make sure that there are civil engineers on the panel. There's folks working in DPW, there's planners, there's a number of citizen representatives, there's representatives of local government, and certainly public safety as well. And you're actually represented by both fire and public safety from the town of Barnstable, so well represented there. So first I want to thank everyone on the committee and just want to identify that this group is meeting throughout the process to guide the process, to make sure that there's a number of perspectives as we develop this plan. Overall, this plan is under the framework of the Federal Highway Administration is administering these funds. This is the mechanical bit here. At the Cape Cod Commission, we applied for funding to do a regional plan, and then ultimately that's going to qualify the towns to go after additional funding. Town of Barnstable is actually one step ahead already. Since we were underway in developing a plan, they were able to go after and were successful at getting some supplemental safety funds, so great that they're going to be able to benefit there. And this will also open up our towns for implementation funds to actually implement the projects we're talking about. So mechanically, this is important to get the funding, but we also see this as an important effort beyond that as well. And really, what are we going to do as part of the plan? First, the systematic safety analysis. We can't ever have enough resources to go after these problems. We have to start by being really pragmatic and systematic about the analysis. So you'll see some of the results of that today. We have to really think about what the root causes are. So we're going to have a slide today talking about what are the causes of the fatalities we're seeing in the region, really to tackle those. Also realizing that it's not about all of these Cadillac projects. You certainly have some big ones in your town right now, but there are a lot of low-cost strategies as well that certainly could be implemented, and that's going to pave a way to the safer future. I won't highlight everything on the slide here, but these are some of the elements that are required to be included in the plan, and a couple of them are really important in my mind that I want to highlight. So one at the top there is leadership, commitment, and goal setting. So I'll go into this a little bit later, but it's really important that those in a decision-making seat commit to this as a vision. So certainly it's a large effort to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries, but it takes a lot of little steps. So whether it be at the policy level, thinking about how we're allocating our resources, or whether it's reviewing an individual project and thinking about is this contributing to the overall safer system. So that's important, and that's something that the town will be looking at in the future if they would like to proceed down this path. And then I did want to circle back again on policy. So we'll talk about infrastructure, and it's about sidewalks and about safer intersections, but there are policy things as well that are really important to make sure some of these things are done in a systematic manner. And I'll give you some examples of those as we go through. And then finally, actually referencing something I heard earlier, progress and transparency. We really won't know if we're succeeding unless we're carefully tracking this. So you'll see some dashboards we're developing and really seeing what is the progress we're being made as a region, and if we're not progressing, what sort of adjustments need to be made. Here's the overall schedule. I won't go over the details here, but the high points are we're through the bulk of the safety analysis. We're right now in the outreach phase, so we're doing a variety of outreach activities and coming up with a variety of strategies that ultimately will be put into a draft plan that will be put out for public comment in early 2025. So that'll be an opportunity to see the culmination of everything done to that point before we develop a final plan. And that final plan is what will then allow towns to go after that implementation funding, the dollars to implement the projects we're talking about. So I'll dig into a little bit of the data here to share some of the things we've been seeing. And we'll start out just by the big number. So all the numbers you'll see on the next couple of slides are the numbers related to the last 6 years of data we have. So over 6 years, nearly 30,000 crashes reported on Cape Cod. So certainly significant cumulatively when you look at it, but we really want to dig in a bit further to understand what are the major levers here. So the first thing to understand is they're not distributed equally across the region. A little washed out on the screen here, but you can probably see the very bright spot here. And in this case, that's not a good thing. That's right where we're sitting, here in the center of Hyannis. So there's some work to be done. Now, part of that, admittedly, is just due to the density of the roadways and the signals here. But there is a lot of work to be done on the infrastructure. So certainly there's a lot of hard infrastructure concentrated in this area. And much of it was not designed for the multitude of users we see today. So this is kind of at the 30,000-foot level. You'll see in the next slides we're digging in further to get a little more specific. The other thing we want to recognize is that this doesn't hit all communities equally. So this is just showing an overlay of environmental justice communities, ones with specific thresholds, because we certainly understand that those communities are disproportionately represented in a high way for fatalities and serious injuries. There's a lot of confounding factors there. A lot of it has to do with the mode choices they have or don't have in the areas that they're living. So certainly we want to recognize that an equitable solution is not one that is equal across the region. It's recognized in the different places that individuals are coming from.
Stop for a quick question. Go ahead, Ray.
Absolutely.
You got me on that one. Environmental justice?
Absolutely. Yeah, let me define that term for you there.
Please.
So that is a bit jargony. That is the way the state and the federal government looks at disadvantaged communities through this lens. And it's specifically communities with a disproportionate concentration of low-income households, minority households, and those with limited English proficiency. So those three are tied to poor health outcomes when it comes to transportation. So they're a focus for investments in this area. So in some cases, that's tied to, again, mode choice, with a higher percentage are taking public transit, biking, or pedestrians. Also a whole number of other confounding factors. But thank you for that question. It's those specific three groups that make up environmental justice. To flip it on the positive side, it does also qualify those areas for additional funding at the federal level. So one of the reasons I suspect that the town was successful in that grant is that it did have a high percentage of environmental justice communities. Next thing I want to highlight again is that there is inequality in this space, and certainly pedestrians and bicyclists are disproportionately represented in those fatal and serious injury crashes. So this is just showing the trend of those over the 3 years. So maybe to put it into one number to take away, on average over the last 6 years, every 3 days a bicyclist or a pedestrian is struck by a vehicle. So every 3 days a human being is hit by a car. So that's quite a staggering number from my perspective. When you think about the outcomes of a person versus a car, you can see the way that turns out, and you'll see that's a good focus of effort going forward. One, because of the outcomes there, and two, because frankly much of our transportation system was not designed with those users in mind. So there's a lot of work to do to try to fix those numbers. So of those 30,000 or so crashes across the region, they resulted in 81 fatal crashes and 644 serious injuries. Serious injury defined as something that has life-altering consequences, certainly for the individual, also for the families as well. So again, quite a staggering number when you think about it, cumulatively a little over 13 a year in terms of fatalities and many more serious injuries. So there's still a good ways to go in terms of bringing these numbers down. We're actually safer than a lot of other regions, which is good, but we still have substantial work to do to drive those numbers down. This is one area where Barnstable leads the pack on the Cape. Again, not a category you want to win. Over those 6 years, 15 fatal crashes within the town of Barnstable specifically, highest on the Cape. You can see a lot of that is population related, but certainly a high number in Barnstable. So certainly a lot of issues, a lot of work that DPW, planning, fire, and emergency personnel are working on there. Breaking down those 81 fatal crashes, this is where you start to see those vulnerable road users, a term for pedestrians and bicyclists, disproportionately represented. So certainly many more of those collisions result in fatalities when it comes to pedestrians and bicyclists. We also see motorcyclists came out quite strong in the data in terms of fatalities, really an outlier based on the amount of mileage they're traveling compared to the number of fatalities that we're seeing. So something else to pay attention to. And what are the causes of these? So I teased this earlier. On the left-hand side is the type of collision involved in these fatal crashes, and on the right is the top contributing code. So on the left-hand side, you're seeing mostly vehicle-to-vehicle crashes, although a substantial number of collisions with trees, people running off the road, and then pedestrians and guardrails. And what are the top causes? Reckless driving, speeding, which is very similar. Reckless driving can also include things like distraction with a cell phone, certainly something we've seen ticked up in recent years. But you will notice those top 2, 3 at least are tied specifically to human behavior. So that's some of the challenges where civil engineering can only go so far. So as we go a bit deeper, we're starting to look at specifically the roadway network and identifying those segments of roadways where we're seeing those fatalities and serious injuries, and also the segments that we know just by the characteristics are unsafe. So certainly it's great to identify a location where there's a known problem and fix it. It's better to know there's a problem ahead of time. So to give a specific example, anywhere there's a 4-lane roadway without a median, undivided 4-lane roadway, that is unsafe. That can be blanketly stated based on crash data, so we don't have to wait for crashes to occur. We know that's a condition that needs to be addressed. We know there's a few of those in Barnstable specifically. I know the town's already looking at the Route 132 corridor. Statistically speaking, that's something that needs to be addressed, and we don't, again, have to wait for the crashes there. We've done this work across the Cape. We have a draft map here. You'll see some of the roads that come to the top in Barnstable are probably the ones that you would expect based on some of the crashes. Route 132 and Route 28 came out quite high in a number of locations. Also some roads in the downtown area that we'll dig into a bit more. But these are the locations that statistically are popping out on the map in terms of high crashes and things that could be set up for potential projects in the future. So what are some of the countermeasures we're looking at? This could certainly involve a variety of things, but I wanted to highlight a couple of them in the different categories here. Certainly speed management is one that is certainly critical. We're seeing a high correlation between these fatal and serious injury crashes and speeding. We know there's a lot of strategies required. The town's doing a number of them, and there are certainly some like speed cameras, which are not currently legal in the state, so I just do want to make that clear. But it is a proven safety countermeasure elsewhere, so something that I know the state is looking at, but not currently an option. There are lower cost things like lighting, which certainly have a high payout in terms of safety benefits. There's a number of things related to roadway design. The town, in fact, has piloted a number of them across town, so we've seen some of those been successful. And then a whole host of things to be done on the pedestrian and bicyclist front, like rectangular rapid flash beacons, those quickly flashing things that you've been seeing at crossings recently. Again, another proven safety countermeasure. These are the sort of things that could be implemented with the implementation funding. So that's the data part. That's the engineering side of my brain, but certainly we understand there's a human side as well. So we've been doing a variety of public engagement activities to learn what can't be understood from the data specifically. So we've been doing targeted outreach. I'll highlight just a couple of those activities, but again, trying to reach different groups. We met with a focus group specifically talking about the challenges with our seasonal workforce. Many of those aren't familiar with their area, and certainly they have some unique challenges getting around. We had a focus group just with emergency personnel and first responders to understand what they're seeing in this space. Certainly everywhere we go, we hear the mantra, we need more enforcement. I mean, there's only so much you can do in that space. We want to understand the story from their side as well. I already mentioned the committee. We've also had a series of public meetings to get public feedback. We had one in this room just over a week ago. Had some really active members of the community sharing their opinions. We had some discussions for over an hour here on some of those topics, so gathering that feedback as well. And also collecting data and information from folks online. So I wanted to highlight that opportunity here because that is going to be open through the end of the calendar year. We do have an online website where anyone could put in what they're seeing on their roadway network. So whether that's reporting let's see if this will play. So this will just run through kind of a demo here, but you can enter a specific point to say, this is a place where I had a near collision. I want to make sure that's reported. Here's a place where I identify a challenge as a pedestrian, or if there's even a solution that someone might have, you can put that in. And everyone can just put the point in. You can also reply to other folks. We can start to see a string of people agreeing on specific locations. So you can scan around the Cape, up over 700 points at this point. So certainly plenty of locations identified. And this sort of crowdsourced data is going to supplement some of the hard data that we're seeing. One of the interesting phenomena we get is sometimes there's a very dangerous location that everybody knows about, and they kind of are just cautious around it. So it doesn't mean there's not a problem. It just might not be coming out in the crash data. So good to be aware of that from the human side as well. Also wanted to pull out some specific things. These are all things that we heard directly from folks in the town of Barnstable. So when we were here last week, everything on the left is things that I individually heard in conversation. A lot of folks talked about the challenge as a pedestrian or a cyclist getting to the places they want to get to, like Hyannis, Main Street, trying to figure out how to navigate there. There was, from many attendees, a level of excitement about the changes planned for Main Street. There are also interest in speed reduction strategies, as well as thinking about ways to make improvements incrementally as road work is done, with a specific suggestion to look at where a fog line is painted whenever you're repaving a roadway, see if there's an opportunity to make a little more space for the bicyclist. And on the right side there is just direct quotes from things that folks have added on our website. So talking about some very specific suggestions about a traffic signal just down the street and how they don't feel it's appropriately accommodating pedestrians. Someone talking about the unsafe sidewalk conditions on Route 6A in Barnstable in a specific location. And then the one on the bottom I think is worth highlighting is I think sometimes we hear the bicyclist community and you see the kind of active recreational cyclists. And on the bottom there is just someone identifying that they ride down Yarmouth Road, Willow Street, because that's how they get to their cousin's house. So it's not about making sure we build a bike path for recreational folks to come. That's great. But a lot of times it's about where are the people coming from and going to, and they don't have the luxury of using the path. So we have to think about those cyclists on Willow Street, Yarmouth Road. Unfortunately, he or she stated they felt like they were almost killed going down that roadway. So out there, not by choice, but by necessity. So I know that was a good amount of me talking at you. Hopefully it was some helpful context and a few things to come away from. When we had the session here last week, we had a variety of boards set up across the room to gather feedback. I tried to bring in a couple of those elements for the conversation here. So certainly would love to hear about any of the things up here on the slide, or happy to answer any more questions. So certainly you have a wealth of experience based on the bigger picture planning and site specific. So I'd be curious if you could think of any challenges that you see in implementing this vision so that we could be aware of that. If there's anything in terms of actual infrastructure that you think would be important to discuss or you would like to share, love to hear that. And then also really interested in non-infrastructure solutions. Again, some of those strategies or policies, whether it be having to do with education, whether it could be policies a town could enact. I will say Barnstable does have a complete streets policy, so that's a great step in that direction. Safety campaigns ideas, as you saw, speeding and distracted driving, reckless driving is right up there, so certainly work to be done, and unfortunately many examples of that recently as well. Enforcement, certainly part of it, and anything else, open to any creative strategies as well. So I'll turn it back to the chair and happy to answer any questions or take any feedback.
Well, thank you, Mr. Tupper. Phenomenal job. Great presentation. Very detailed, very thorough. Obviously, you know your stuff, and you put a lot of effort into this. So thank you so much for that. It's a very worthy cause here, and it dovetails so nicely with what Jim and his department is already doing. I know Kate has talked a lot about this, and it's just great to see that partnership and collaboration. Just one question: the zero, Vision Zero. I assume that is kind of stating that goal of no serious injury or fatalities. Is that what that means?
That is correct.
Okay, that's great. I love that. One other thing that I wanted to point out that I really liked was the fact that there's a focus on those kind of low-cost, low-hanging fruit options, because when you hear a presentation like this, the first thing you think is, well, we've got to redo all our roads, and there's just so many that it just seems so daunting because they're just so kind of old and outdated. So it's great to hear that there are some low-cost, simple, proven strategies. So that's great to hear. And yeah, I mean, the downtown Hyannis area is definitely the area that comes to mind for me. I work at a business located on Yarmouth Road, Willow Street, and it's just horrendous for any sort of pedestrian or bicyclist. When they get to our lot, they're kind of home free because they can walk safely through our lot. But once they're back on the road, it's just horrible. 132, same thing. That road needs a median the whole way down. And it's all about sidewalks. It's all about giving space to pedestrians and having people have the ability to ride their bikes safely. And then the last one is I felt strongly about that comment about the individual that, travels from the intersection of 132 and 6A down to BWB. I went to BWB, and I know 6A very well. And it's just some areas are fine. Most areas are not. So it's a challenge, definitely. So, yeah, this is great. I'm all for it. Questions, comments from the rest of the board? Michael?
Yeah, I echo what you just said. Great presentation, by the way. This is a huge problem in Hyannis, especially during the summer when we have like newcomers, you know, and they all ride the bikes, and I see a lot of accidents. So this is great. You went straight to the point. I agree with you 100% on it, and thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Michael. Matt?
Thank you. I'm speaking from experience because I was run over on Route 6A as a child.
Oh, my God.
So thank you for that, for what you're doing. One of the things I think is becoming a prevalent issue here, and I'm sure this has probably come up in your study, but the prevalence of the e-bikes and the e-scooters, I have been shocked recently. You know, I'm talking people on a scooter with no helmet doing 35, 40 miles an hour down the travel lane. You know, the horseless carriage, when that came to America, changed the way traffic engineer, I mean, it is the beginning of real traffic engineering. Where does that come into play in terms of policy? Because I can see an argument either way, but it's not a bike. Right? You know, an e-scooter that can do 30, 40 miles an hour and can travel 40, 50, 60, 70 miles is a vehicle. And they're extremely dangerous. I see them all the time, even at night. I almost killed a kid over across from Shaw's on West Main Street about 3 weeks ago. Where do you guys, any feedback on that yet, or any kind of concepts on that?
Yeah, great question. That's certainly at the edge of where research is right now in terms of what are the implications for safety. I will say initially there's a lot of hope that they would be mobility assistance devices and get people on bikes that maybe couldn't quite get over that hurdle and expand their ability to get around. But we're certainly seeing some safety issues on the backside of it. I think it starts with overall etiquette for bicyclists, but it ends up allowing those in e-bikes to be able to go much faster than they would with a regular bike and get into much more dangerous situations much more quickly. And it really has created some significant safety issues, and really regulating them has been quite a challenge. I know there's some regulation on the rail trail specifically, and I know Falmouth has just in the last couple of weeks been thinking about how to manage it on the Shining Sea path. But it's one of those, it's both tough to enforce, any sort of regulation you do, and then also really thinking about what that means downstream. If you can't regulate it, you have to understand what are the safety implications. So I don't have a good answer, and I don't think anybody does at this
So
point.
I will challenge you, because if your mission is Vision Zero, you could be at zero and stay there before we stack a bunch of bodies up and say, geez, we really have to regulate e-bikes. You know, I mean, this is the infancy of I mean, they're fantastic. There's a lot of benefits to them, but 40, 50 miles an hour on a bike with no helmet or even a scooter is a recipe for disaster. So best of luck with trying to figure that out.
Absolutely.
it's a
And
big challenge.
if I might, I just want to thank you certainly for highlighting that. And I do want to make sure I'm clear that bicyclist or e-bike helmets, and it's actually the law for the front and rear lights at night. So certainly that makes a big difference. I ran up on one just last night, in fact. And so certainly I want to start with those basic safety premises, and I think there's a lot more work to be done.
Free reflective vests in your public outreach program. It is the simplest.
Yeah,
it is the
it's not a bad
simplest.
idea.
It is the simplest thing you could do for a pedestrian, biker, or scooter rider. When I was in the Army, it was mandated, and I can't tell you, one simple strip of reflective band on somebody can save a life in a heartbeat.
Well said. Yeah, great point. Ray?
So, Matt, well said. Those folks are scary, and we have to go to enforcement on the paths, like the Shining Path. That was a revolutionary group in Peru.
Oh, the Shining Sea Path?
Shining Sea Path. That's
Yeah.
right. Just like we have overhead toll collectors, we may have to have overhead sensors, so if someone comes whipping through at a excessive speed, whatever that is, or without appropriate protection or whatever, we can't have human beings chasing them around. So I think we need to think smart about that. And I second Matt's point about getting ahead of it before we're left trying to figure out what to do. Mr. Chairman, one other thing which I'm glad that you asked, because it was when I see Vision Zero, I was it was like the EJ. I never would have guessed that's what it was. Environmental justice means where poor people live. Vision Zero, I thought, was some kind of like drink. And then you add Vision Zero Action, and I went, oh my goodness, that's rather unfortunate. So I don't know who came up with the plan name, but I hope it didn't take a lot of discussion, and whoever it is should go buy beer for everybody else that said they would go along with it. So Jim, where does this Safe Streets program fold into this, or does it, or is this another one of those good ideas going on, and are we getting stapled together here?
Oh, yes, sir. You referred to the Safe Streets, the Complete Streets. Yeah, we have a number of different programs, and we're working hand in hand with the commission on most of them. Complete Streets, we have our policy in place, and so every time we begin to implement a new roadway, we utilize that policy to see if there are, bike accommodations or proper lane widths. And opportunities for all modes of transportation. Safe Streets, we actually just received a grant to study 14 intersections for road safety audits to basically further a lot of the findings that the commission's already has done the work for. And so, yeah, we're constantly looking at ways to improve our network, and this is just another one of those plans that we could utilize and take a lot of the findings and kind of lift up, look for grant opportunities and implement quickly, hopefully.
Good show. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, well said. Bob, anything to add?
Yeah, thanks. I want to endorse pretty much everything you had in your plan, and as well as all the comments made by Ray and by Matt and by Michael, as well as Steve. There's so many issues, that it's even hard to prioritize them to a certain extent. But I mean, there's very few places in the town of Barnstable where bicycles can go safely. It's a practical matter, whether you're doing it for recreation, whether you're doing it for exercise, whether you're doing it to go from point A to point B, but you don't have a car. I walked once from my house in Osterville to Craigville Beach. Once. I was, forced off the road twice in an area where there was no sidewalks, and fortunately, space I could jump to, but all over town. I just use that one as an example. That's all over the town of Barnstable. You might have sidewalks for 50% of a roadway, no sidewalks for another 50%, and the highest danger areas always seem to be the ones where there's no sidewalks, because they're on blind curves. There's no margins on the side for people to get off the paved, road. I rode my bicycle once from my house in Osterville down to my Wimpy's in that area. Once. I would never do it again. And Osterville is certainly not a high-density, high-speed area, compared to other parts of the town of Barnstable. But if you're going 45 miles an hour on Main Street in Osterville, you're slow. It's a 30-mile-an-hour zone. 30 miles an hour. Cars, I see more cars doing 50 than 30, and we need more signs. We need more signs all over the town, so I'm not pitching necessarily to put a sign in Osterville on Main Street, although it wouldn't be a bad idea, Jim, to put it on. But I mean, everything that everyone has said is right. We have a town that's 400 years old and a transportation system that's 300 years old, and people traveling in the 21st century on roads and paths that can't accommodate the, essentially we have to start over again thought-wise, which is what you're advocating, and, put money behind it to fix these things. And until we do, we're going to get all these accidents, Bicycles are entitled to share the road, same as a pedestrian or a car. But almost everywhere in the town of Barnstable, if you're riding a bike, you're inviting danger, and it shouldn't be that way. We have to fix it. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, well said. No, great comments. Tim?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Tupper, for your presentation. It was very informative, and I think I agree with all the sentiment of the board members, especially what Matt said and brought up a great point about the e-bikes. I didn't even really register that, and the second it was said, it was, oh yeah, and that's, you really, in the past year or two, starting to see a lot more of them on the road, and it's inevitably, sometime it's late at night or at dusk or in an area where you wouldn't suspect, maybe it's a back road or something. I mean, it's happened to me a couple of times of, whoa, who's coming around the corner? So I think that issue is just going to become more and more prevalent. even if the numbers are low and there's maybe not a lot of e-bike use now, and, maybe it grows 20, 30, 40%, kind of slowly, but it will become an issue, a larger and larger issue with more, even slightly more use, just given the nature of our road network that we have now. As Bob had said, taking a walk from Osterville to Craigville Beach, being pushed off the road or biking around, and then, put somebody in an e-bike that's go that same path, and now they're doing 40 and it's nighttime. One thing to add to that, and I don't know what the regulations around them are, but when you travel to different parts of the country, what's becoming very prominent in tourist areas are, I guess, e-bikes or scooters. Like in Nashville, they have like the bird scooters or the lime scooters.
Like the low-speed vehicles? Like the low.
I don't know,
I know
like
exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's like a Razor scooter with a battery in it. It's
Those
not
things
quite.
fly.
They
Yeah,
fly.
you rent them with your phone.
Yeah, and
I had some fun with those, sorry.
yeah. So we were down in Nashville. We had a blast on them, but I said,
Oh, yeah.
I hope this never comes to the Cape.
I said the same thing.
It would be the most dangerous thing I could think of if you put.
You're getting out of the bars and people are going over the scooters. I mean,
Yeah,
literally,
it's,
that's.
it's crazy. I could not believe it was legal.
I know.
But I think they're becoming more and more prominent, and especially a lot of touristy areas. I think in some places in Florida, some places in coastal Carolina, they're becoming more and more popular because a company can come in, set up a couple stands, and they can all go out, and then suddenly you have a ton of these things out on the streets. So I could foresee a time where, in Provincetown or in Hyannis here or something, a couple of these stands get set up, and it's just, it can create a very dangerous situation. So I don't know what, at the commission level, town level, or if it's a state thing, I don't know how those operations are permitted, but I think, we should probably try to take a stance against it or put some serious regulation or thought around how they can be regulated and some of the concerns there. Because I could foresee that, coming to the Cape at some point. The other thing I wanted to ask is how does this program and how does the Cape Cod Commission interact with the state? Particularly Route 28 and Route 132. And in fact, Jim, I think, was there maybe like a year ago, wasn't there a work group with the state over the 132 corridor and starting to look at kind of the second phase long-term planning for that? Is that kind of starting to kind of bubble up?
Yeah, we're doing that locally. We're looking at the 132 stretch from where the state route ends to the airport rotary, essentially. So that stretch.
Oh, so is that around the police station? Is that where it switches from State Road to Town Road?
Essentially so, yeah.
Okay, so that's an in-town thing.
Yes, correct.
Well, the reason why I ask is, one of the most dangerous sections of road I can think of in the town of Barnstable is, 28, basically from the Bell Tower Mall to the Mashpee line. And, that stretch, Santuit, Newtown, Route 130, I think there's been, I don't know how many fatal accidents over, there's a one versus motorcycle about a year ago, and there's a ton of accidents through there. And I don't know what ability maybe the commission has to push the state into, getting something going there or pushing along or having some serious input that, it's not just a civil engineering, road layout question of, okay, we need more capacity or maybe there's a traffic light that gets added in. The state's probably looking at that level. But, one thing that I look at, and I don't know if it was a state initiative or a town initiative, but on 28 near, I don't know, the middle school to Bierce's and I think Bobby Burns, there's a really wide section of sidewalk, or maybe it's like a mixed-use path or something. I don't know if that's in the state layout or if the town did that to the side of what the state
project.
did. That was a town project?
Yeah, it's a shared use path. That's the same thing that's actively being constructed on Bursa's from 28 to 132. So I'm trying to make that network throughout.
That network throughout, so like something like that, if that could continue alongside and correspond with whatever state projects could be coming up at 28 out to the Mashpee line, anything that can, I think, be leaned into the state to try to get what we want, I think it would be really important.
Yeah,
I have a
well
few
said.
things if you'd like me to respond to that.
Yeah, go for it.
So certainly a lot of great points that you brought up there and a lot of things that are in progress and great to see that there's support locally for it. So to answer your specific question about how this relates to the state, first of all, they're behind it is the short answer. They actually provided the local match. So it was the grant to do this work was 80% federal. MassDOT put up the 20% because they understood the importance of doing this sort of work to identify future projects. And those specific locations you mentioned, in fact, have all been ones that we have worked with the town to look at in the past. So Bursa's Way was a planning study we did with the town and actually right about when I came on, and then ultimately resulted in that construction project that you saw. Similarly, we've taken a look at the Bell Tower Mall area and as also the Santuit Newtown intersection with 28. That's one that actually is in the queue now for the state to take a look at. It certainly hit all the numbers, unfortunately, based on the multiple fatalities at that location. So that is in line for an improvement at that location. And the state has actually looked at 28 as an entire corridor across Cape Cod and does have a plan for consistent treatments along the Route 28 corridor. Certainly many, many years and many millions of dollars to get there. But if you look at the projects planned over the next 5 years, the majority of projects that are getting state funding are actually Route 28, and they're kind of picking off piece by piece. So they will make progress for a number of those locations. You mentioned certainly a good amount of time to get to some of them, and we can do a lot of this other work at the same time. But I will say that the state is rowing in the same direction on this effort and certainly aware of the issues with Route 28. And then the last thing you mentioned I wanted to circle back to is the e-bikes and e-scooters. The only other thing I can offer is certainly the state is trying to catch up in this space. They recently, in the last couple of years, put in regulations to start to classify e-bikes. So now there's a class 1 and a class 2. Has to do with the speeds they can hit and whether or not they're pedal assisted or just throttle controlled. So the first step to any sort of enforcement is getting a regulation behind it. So they're kind of working along those. And e-scooters or other e-mobility devices are certainly the next wave of thinking about that. The ones I'm familiar with in a lot of those urban areas that you mentioned there, the municipality would have a role in regulating any sort of business like that coming in using the public roads. So certainly if someone were to come to Barnstable, I would hope the town would take a careful look at anything related to permits and any sort of requirements for safety, because certainly while they could provide mobility benefits, you've all highlighted some of the safety concerns that would be expected given the road network that we have here in Barnstable and across all of Cape Cod, really. So great points. Thank you.
Yeah, well said. I'm just going to add two things that just popped into my head. One of them is, the education of drivers, I think, would be a complete lost cause. I think that drivers are going to do what they're going to do, and I don't think they're going to listen to education. I think you're going to have to force drivers' behavior with, speed humps and rumble strips and, flashing beacons and all that. I think that would be a waste of money personally. And then the other thing I think about is walkable downtown. Our downtown in Hyannis, to me, it feels like vehicles come first, pedestrians come second. But you think about other walkable downtowns like Newport, Nantucket, Vineyard Haven, Provincetown. I even think about in Florida, like Fort Myers Beach. In those areas, it is clear to anybody that goes in those areas, in season, pedestrians come first, vehicles come second. And I don't know how that message got across, but it got across. I also don't know if maybe that means we need to think seasonally here in Barnstable, simply because if you told me, downtown Osterville, in season, Memorial to Labor, I need to drive 20, I drive 20. That makes sense to me. But if you told me today I need to drive 20, I'm not driving 20. You know what I mean? So maybe, there's seasonal rules and regulations that might apply. I think you could make the same argument for downtown Hyannis. It's just a different world in Q1 than it is in the middle of the summer. So something to think about. Anything else? Questions, comments, concerns? Good to go? Thank you so much. This was
Thank you very
great.
much.
Yeah, great job. Okay, moving along, looking for approval of minutes. Everybody have a chance to review the November 25th, 2024 draft minutes. All right, look for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you, Bob. And a second?
Second.
Thank you, Michael. All those in favor? Michael?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Ray?
Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
Tim?
Aye.
And myself, Steve Robichaud, votes aye. Minutes are approved. Future meetings, January 13th and January 27th, 2025. Here in person at 7 p.m. Anything else before we adjourn? Ray?
Merry Christmas.
Same to you. Thank you.
Yep. Merry Christmas.
Jim, Karen, you guys all set?
Is this
Okay.
our last meeting?
Last meeting of 2024.
Yep.
You want to keep it going for a bit, Tim?
No, that's it.
Read the
Wrap it
zoning
up.
bylaw, Ted. Read the zoning bylaw. It'll be like
Word
it
for
was the
word,
night
come
before
on.
Christmas, except
Get
it'll
to
be all
work.
night. Next year. New Year's Eve, Tim.
New Year's Eve, yeah.
We'll read it together.
All right, I move to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Matt. All those in favor? Michael?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Ray?
Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
Tim?
Aye.
And myself, Steve Robichaud, votes aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.